symposium panel on surveillance technology and artificial intelligence titled Nothing to Hide, Surveillance Technology and the Risks and Rewards of AI. I'm Isaac Rolick McClure, a sophomore here at Tufts University studying urban planning, political science, and history.
I'm Theo Sullivan. I'm also a sophomore, and I'm studying international relations, history, and Chinese.
We are so honored to be able to present this panel of experts here today, and are both incredibly excited for this crucial discussion.
Over the past decade, advances in AI, particularly in machine learning, computer vision, and large-scale data analytics, have transformed surveillance from passive recording to active interpretation. Systems once limited to storing footage can identify faces, track movements across cities, analyze behavioral patterns, and generate real-time alerts. From tools developed by companies like Palantir and Clearview AI, to public sector deployments by agencies including the NSA, AI-driven surveillance is no longer speculative. It's operational and expanding.
At the same time, the global rollout of facial recognition systems, predictive policing algorithms, and biometric databases, from pilot programs in London to large-scale implementations in China, has intensified debate about privacy, consent, bias, accountability, and the balance of power between institutions and individuals.
This panel brings together experts in technology, public policy, and civil society who have generously agreed to share their expertise and help us answer several pressing questions. With that, we're delighted to introduce the panelists.
Joseph Cox is an investigative journalist and co-founder of 404 Media, a reporter-owned media company focused on the increasingly fraught intersection between technology and civil liberties. An award-winning investigative journalist focused on generating impact, Joseph's work has triggered hundreds of millions of dollars worth of fines, legal battles, and the closure of several tech companies. Before his time at 404, Joseph was a Vice Media's Motherboard Star cybersecurity reporter. He is also the author of Dark Wire, an Economist and Financial Times best book of 2024, chronicling an FBI-ran global encrypted phone state and offering a rare window into the expanding reach of modern digital surveillance.
Tyler Peppel is an entrepreneur, educator, and researcher working with multiple teams to develop socially beneficial AI. His AI interest began in Marvin Minsky's 1980s MIT lectures on machines that can understand stories. Tyler went on to earn a master's from the MIT Media Lab, researching the shift from analog to digital media and its impact on communication. He then spent 5 years at Apple, leading a team that evolved the Macintosh to support interactive video, audio, and animation, enabling new media-rich applications. He's presently an adjunct faculty member and postdoctoral researcher at NYU, where he conducts research relating to AI and communication. Tyler is CEO of Riskwise AI, an AI-driven risk intelligence platform that continuously monitors billions of data points across a broad and diverse set of data sources to detect and alert institutions of emerging risks substantially earlier than current methods allow, enabling the opportunity to mitigate million-dollar issues before they escalate into billion-dollar crisis events.
Dr. Jason Lian is a postdoctoral researcher at the Harvard Kennedy School's Nonviolent Action Lab. He is also an affiliate for the Institute of Quantitative Social Science at Harvard University and the Center for Political Studies at the University of Michigan. He holds a PhD in political science and international affairs, a master's degree in artificial intelligence, and a master's degree in statistics from the University of Georgia. His research is centered on a core question: how can technological advancement expand civil liberties and protect vulnerable actors while simultaneously constraining new instruments of repression?
Professor Sean O'Brien is an associate research scholar at Yale Law School, where he founded the Yale Privacy Lab and serves as director of the Cybersecurity and Computer Science programs. He's also an assistant professor at Bay Path University and deputy director of the Free Software Foundation. Professor O'Brien has more than 2 decades of experience in areas including infrastructure management, free and open source software, and blockchain security across both the private and public sectors. At Ivy Cyber, he develops the communication of remote classes and guides the privacy-safe, secure hardware and software projects. His work has appeared in the New York Times, Wired, AP, NBC, Popular Science, Forbes, Financial Times, and more.
Surveillance technologies are often framed as tools for safety and efficiency, but they also reshape norms about anonymity, public space, and the boundaries between private and public life. The decisions made here today by lawmakers, companies, and communities will shape the infrastructure of power for decades to come.
Our goal today is not just to debate whether AI-driven surveillance should exist, but to ask how it should be designed, regulated, and constrained, if at all, to reflect our shared values. Our panelists will begin with presentations, followed by a few rounds of pre-prepared questions for each panelist, and ending with an open audience Q&A. Thank you all very much for being here, and with that, let's begin.
Oh, I can do it myself.
Yeah, you
Wow, okay. All right, can you hear me okay? Sorry about the noise. Okay, I'll do my timer. Yeah, so as mentioned, I'm Joseph Cox from 404. I won't go into too much detail about that, but as I said, we were Motherboard, technology section of ICE. That company was going bankrupt, so we decided to go make our own independent media company. We took this very novel idea that you would pay the journalists to produce journalism, and it's turned out that actually works, at least the scale we're operating at. It may not work for everybody, but right now we are able to sustain our investigations by doing that. So just give you an idea of the sort of stuff I cover so they can inform the questions. I focus a lot on showing readers what a story is rather than just telling them. So I heard from a bounty hunter source that you could buy the location data of any phone in the United States. I said, what the hell are you talking about? There's no way that's true. I then gave them $300 and they did it. And they geolocated a phone of somebody with their consent. That then led to some of those hundreds of millions of dollars of fines against AT&T. Well, Verizon wasn't part of my story. That's part of the New York Times one, but Sprint and T-Mobile as well. Probably more relevant to discussions nowadays is smartphone location data collected through apps or through the advertising ecosystem, which, you know, they're continuously pushing AI now as well. That sort of stuff keeps coming up. And the impact there is that when I found that the US military was buying location data from ordinary apps, or rather was being sold to US military contractors, including from a Muslim prayer app, which users that app weren't particularly happy with, and neither was Apple and Google, so they pushed out that vendor from their app stores. There's then browsing data as well. This is when, I think it was Avast, which is an antivirus provider. You install the antivirus on your computer, obviously it blocks the threats from malware or whatever else. But it was also surreptitiously selling the browsing data of its free users to companies like Coca-Cola and that sort of thing. So after we reported that, I think 24 hours later, the company shut down entirely. Then, you know, the reason I include this is because those are all like big kind of at scale surveillance programs or operations or companies or whatever, but it really can impact people on a day-to-day basis where you're even going through the New York subway and there might be some sort of, you know, privacy issue in there that can reveal the station that you've joined out and potentially someone can follow your movements as well. And the point I bring up here is that demonstrations work. As I said, you know, I paid that bounty hunter and that led to impact. To be clear, we don't pay sources for information. The point there was to be, well, if I can buy it for $300, then anyone can. That's the purpose of doing it. Getting more to the AI stuff. This is where I made my own fake ID with an AI tool on the underground. I think it was like $50 in Bitcoin, something like that. And then those sorts of AI-powered capabilities are moving to law enforcement. This is one called GeoSpy, which can geolocate where a photo is taken very, very quickly. Now, usually you'd have people like Bellingcat, which is an open source intelligence collective or organization, or you'd have OC specialists in government or elsewhere. This tool can make geolocation possible for essentially any law enforcement officer who may not necessarily be an expert in geolocation. In a lot of ways, that's a very liberating technology. It's going to allow a lot more officials to dive into this world and produce this sort of work. Problem is, when we covered it, anybody could use it as well. They share the public tool as well. And then 24 hours after we approached them for comment, they closed that off so only the police could access it. Something I think maybe some of the other panelists may touch on is sort of how data and AI can reveal stuff that we simply couldn't do before. And it is very much the scale where I cover this company called Patterns, and they get location data from the advertising ecosystem. And we got this video, we looked at it, and it showed there were, I think it was from maybe Grindr and some other apps as well, ordinary apps that people had downloaded, and they did not, users of those apps presumably did not realize they were being part of this surveillance program. When we covered that, Google kicked them off of the advertising ecosystem as well. Then I think this is what I'm probably going to talk most about in the panel and the questions if it comes up. For me, AI is less about the marrying of data sets, which is definitely important, and other people can speak better to that than me. For me, it really is like the object recognition stuff, the entity recognition stuff, the facial recognition stuff, where we found that local police were tapping into a nationwide network of tens of thousands of cameras on behalf of ICE. ICE doesn't have a contract with Flop. Actually, we found out later it did after the company lied as well. But local police were doing these lookups. They say, look for this particular license plate or a person of this sort of description, and the system does it for me. That is where my interest lies, in the AI plus surveillance sort of system. And it's not in these slides, but just a few days ago, my co-founder, Jason Kebler, reported that the much hyped Ring Super Bowl advert, which you may have seen, where it's like, hey, turn your Ring camera to find dogs in your local neighborhood who've been lost. We got a leaked email from inside Ring that said that's not going to be limited to just dogs. So everybody knew that was going to happen, but we got the email proving it. And then that's just, you know, another use case of this data as well. And then after we reported that, the ICE stuff, several states were removed from the platform. And I think that might be it. Yeah, that's just a list of impact. I won't bore you with all that, but that's the context I wanted to give you just for the rest of the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now we're going to be hearing from Tyler, who's joining us remotely.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Great, great.
And just let us know when you want to move to the next slide. We can do that.
Yes, can I, so I'm seeing a slide with the panel. Yeah, perfect. As somebody mentioned already, I'm the CEO of a company called Riskwise AI. And to quickly go through what we're working, I think the question of how it relates to surveillance in a broad sense and also in a narrow sense as well. It's very interesting to me, at least, and I hope it's interesting to you as well. So if you can go to the next slide. So looking at what we do at Riskwise AI and came up with this idea of a metaphor of a microscope, in that the microscope enabled us to see things that were previously unseen. And if you go to the next slide, you see some of the results of this ability to see something that's been there forever, perhaps. We just didn't know about it. We just couldn't operate in that realm. And in the way that it opens up a world of possibilities, some of which I've mentioned here in the case of the microscope. AI has a similar ability to enable us to see patterns and connect the dots, if you will, between behaviors and actions and results. And essentially what the platform that we built is designed for is to be able to see patterns, detect patterns from very faint signals. And if you go to the next slide, you can see the product on the right, and the kind of the elevator pitch for RiskWise is this notion of early detection and prediction of risk events. So what are risk events? They are a short list there on the slide on the left, give you some idea of what we're talking about. Another one that's not there that we're going to talk about in a moment is the idea of viral outbreaks, using COVID as an example. The screen, I don't know how readable it is where you are, but it's following ultra-processed foods, and in particular, the health effects of ultra-processed foods. And down at the bottom of the screen, maybe hard to read, it says cancer, obesity, and mental health issues. This is in the lower line graph on the screenshot. So what we're tracking there is mentions of these effects. It can be in news, regulatory filings, social media, and the mentions are a very good tracker of what's happening in the real world. In fact, there have been some interesting papers written on the fact that social media is really just kind of a digital model of real life society and social dynamics. So go ahead and go to the next slide and take a step back for a moment here and just see if I can explain very simply, how this works. We scan data and information in the environment in real time for very faint early stage signals of risk, and we detect patterns that can be tracked over time. So very interesting to me that I think this idea of scanning the information environment, and very broadly, right, we're talking of billions of data points a day, is very much related to what Joseph was talking about, right? It's kind of a very different context, right? But probably the technology is very similar. It's just being applied to a different goal or a different use case. Why this makes sense to do with AI is that if you did it with humans, it would be vastly more costly and it would take years instead of hours. And if you're tracking risks, something like a COVID outbreak that we'll talk about in a moment, obviously, if you can detect it early and before it grows to a kind of escalates to a full-blown crisis, that's a very big thing. And go ahead to the next slide. So here we have two maps, as you can see, of the same area. And this is in Wuhan, China. And on the left, we see an analysis of COVID patients, a cluster of patients. They contracted COVID. And this is centered around the one market, the wet market, you may remember, where there was suspicion that it could be the kind of ground zero for COVID outbreak in China. And on the left-hand side, you'll see data from the World Health Organization for December 2019. And I hope it's readable there, but you can see the market is a red dot kind of near the center of the map, and then you see that the cases clustered around there. On the right-hand side, you see data from Sina Weibo for January to February 2020. So December 2019 on the left, January, February 2020 on the right. Two completely different data sources here. One was put together by a forensic team from the health organization, finding out the home addresses of patients who had been admitted to hospitals with COVID. Right-hand side, these dots represent geolocated social media posts that mention illness, hospitalization, infection, respiratory symptoms, and so on. So you see what's happening here, So I'll take two very different sources of data. One is reconstructed painstakingly, say 1 to 2 years after the outbreak. The one on the right is happening in real time within, within a few days of the events themselves. And it's data that's publicly available off social media and simply by analyzing the social media traffic, the posts, and so on. Now, at the time of these apps, total estimated deaths were less than 1,000 people. So what we do is, if you go to the next slide, what we do with RiskWise is we focus on that, the patterns that you see on the right-hand diagram, because they are immediately available. The pattern is there in real time, as opposed to this kind of forensic reconstruction that takes a lot of time and expense of the type of investigation that's done by the World Health Organization. So we do a lot more than just count the social media posts. We have to fuse together, what the posts are talking about. We have to do the time geolocation. In this case, there's a cluster event, but in a case like opioid fatalities and opioid addiction in the US, the dots on the map are scattered across the continent. So you don't see a geographic dimension to it in particular. There are clusters, but it's a nationwide issue. And then anomaly validation is simply that, well, someone could be talking about respiratory illness, and that starts a chat, and that's, people are joining in. So there's an anomalous cluster of mentions of respiratory illness, but it doesn't mean there's an outbreak. So this is where the AI comes in. If we were just picking up signals, that's one thing. It's this idea of fusing together the semantics, the geolocation, and the anomaly validation, because you get many potential for many kind of false positives. So it's probably obvious, but I'll say it anyway. What we're trying to do is detect these things at a very early stage, so that mediation of the damage and loss can happen as early as possible. If you could go to the next slide. So to wrap this up, we are all about early detection of risk events. Early detection means less damage in terms of human suffering and loss, and less damage in terms of infrastructure, social stress. We all remember this from what we went through during COVID as one example. So less damage in terms of human suffering, and also infrastructure, social disruption, and so on. And less damage being kind of a net win for humanity. So I think that now what we've been recently engaged in, if you go to the next slide, is once you have a system like this, how do you utilize it to create the maximum limitation of damage and the maximum positive outcomes for particular populations or countries or the world in general? And we looked at whether we could deploy this as a nonprofit, where we would build and give it away. That's the circle on the left. Do a for-profit exercise, build and license the technology, or nationalize it for the public good. Work in some kind of public-private partnership with the government to make it a public good, as it says here. Well, the issue, which it says up there in the upper left, is that the system costs a lot of money to operate because of all the scanning and analysis that we talked about earlier. So because of that, to build it and deploy it, or build it and give it away, there'd be lots of ongoing cost to do that, millions of dollars per month. So how would that be funded? And in the case of nationalizing it, we were skeptical about working, especially with the present administration, federal government administration, on a project like this, as to whether we could get a commitment that would last over time. As you know, when administrations change, these policies change. So we landed in the center in a for-profit model where we build and license the technology with the idea that those that will pay a license fee early on could subsidize a free offering of some kind of subsidize also kind of government civil law. Just we'd like to see the capability spread as far and wide as we can. I thought it'd be interesting just to throw in this notion of, what are your choices in deploying something like this? What makes sense? What would you like to do versus what is practical? So I'll just end there, but thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to hearing the other panelists.
Thank you so much, Tyler. Up next is going to be Dr. Mann.
All right. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you to be here on a snowy afternoon. And okay, thank you. Very excited. Could I have my slides on? Okay, nice. Hi. Okay, I'm Jason, and right now I'm a postdoc at Harvard, and I'm going to be joining UT Dallas this fall as a tenure track assistant professor. My research is exactly on this, like AI for democracies, AI on conflict. So very excited to talk about it, and thank you for the invitation. This talk will be based on one of my paper going to coming out at the Journal of Democracy at the April issue. We call it the Autocrats Collaboration Dilemma. So I guess the one-liner takeaway is that AI might not be the silver bullet for repressors or for surveillance. Might be a little bit different from my peer panelist, but let's evaluate how our logic goes. So my training is both in political science and computer science. So when I'm looking at specific technology, I really want to look into the nutshell, like what is actually happening. So when we talk about like AI for surveillance, essentially we're potentially worried that AI might assist the autocrats or the repressors to identify the potential challengers of the regime. Right? I bet everybody agree with this. And when we're using the AI model for that purpose, what kind of model we're talking about? We're probably talking about like large language models, the deep neural network. Essentially, that's a probabilistic model. If you don't know what that is, it's meaning the prediction of the model itself is based on the probability distribution. That, in other words, no matter how accurate your model can be, there will still be a long tail of problems. Or, to put it even simpler, there is no 100% issue in real life, and there won't be 100% accuracy in the probabilistic model. Hopefully, I can put it this way to be clear, to be better understood. And also deploying AI for. Can you hear me this way? I feel like I'm more comfortable talking this way. Okay. So, and deploying AI itself for surveillance is essentially a classification task. It's either a challenger of the regime or not. And based on this kind of three different understandings or our consensus, the key idea is that any prediction system might pick a risk threshold. How risk do you think one person should be before we arrest it, right? And here you have those threshold choosing problems. Essentially, you are facing a dilemma. If you're choosing lower threshold, you can catch more threats, but essentially you got to sweep more innocent into your arrestment. But if you have, meantime, if you have a higher threshold, you're gonna have fewer innocent hits, but you're gonna potentially miss a lot of potential challenges of your regime. So, and because of the nature of such technology, autocrats cannot eliminate such errors. It can only choose which one risk it should take. When we're talking about like so-called errors or this errors caused by this threshold choice, there is essentially two types of errors. One is false positive, or if you want to go fancy, we call it type 1 error, and one is false negative, we call it type 2 errors. Essentially, imagine yourself as the repressors, the central government of China or North Korea, any like those nasty repressors outside. Like essentially, you're facing one dilemma: whether you want to keep securities, keep as secure your regime as could be, but arresting more innocent people and potentially face more pushback, or you don't want poke that many of your populations, but potentially you're gonna let a lot of potential challengers flee away. All right, you can imagine such kind of struggling without AI, even with AI, such struggle will persist. And here is the reason. Why better AI won't solve such struggling? Because first, identifying or classify potential challengers from your population is so-called a railroad event task. Railroad event classification task. Because essentially, in any potential regime, the challengers, or at least the hardcore challengers, are very rare. Even if that's in a very unpopular regimes, like Venezuela and under Maduro's, or right now the North Korea under Kim. Otherwise, the regime should be tipped already. All right, it's a very rare event, and in such cases, you always gonna have this long tail problem. That means in your probabilistic models, predicting long tails, predicting railroad events will always yield much more false positive predictions than false negative. That means you're gonna arrest much more innocent people and potentially piss a lot portion of your population. That's just mathematic. There's like no math of it. And second, there is a trade-off. This railroad event math is essentially asking for the trade-offs. And third part is the concept shift. That means what the evidence you're trying to predict the potential challengers are. Those evidence or those patterns are shifting. For example, if you think, for example, in Hong Kong protest, people tend to wear like black shirt on the street as the sign of consolidations and fighting against the central government. But once that signal has been picked up by the government itself, the protesters are smart enough to change their strategy. Like no more black shirt, let's try black umbrella. Or if they in another examples, like in the online discussions, if people think, if the regimes think like there are some sensitive words like protest, gathering, like a central government is bad, once that pattern is recognized, the activists gonna shift the different the different words they're gonna use. They're gonna use the coded language. They're gonna use the face mask. They're gonna use the different dressing strategies to try to avoid such surveillance. In other words, the target, the patterns you are trying to looking for to identify your challenger is shifting, and that essentially caused a good-hard dilemma or yield to the good-hard law. Once the thing you're trying to measure shift, your metrics is no longer a good measurement. In other words, the patterns is shifting. Like whatever the training data you use to train this model to identify the regimes, this data is already old when this such algorithms is applied on the ground. And third is that there's also authoritarian incentive to store data, or if you're a political scientist, there's a canonical principal agent dilemma. Like the central government tend to as more accurate, as better accuracy as possible, but the local authorities, they have different preference. They might want their data to look better, so less potential challengers in their own areas, because maybe the governors want to promote something like that. So there is a communication cost inside of the authoritarian regimes. And yeah, that also gonna distort such AI applications a little bit. So yeah, the takeaway is that accuracy can improve, but the trade-off never disappear. It just move around. One of the good example is actually happened during the COVID time in China. During the COVID, China's central government take a health code system. So basically, it classified the population as three different kind of health situation. Everybody should have a health code, right? If you have the health code as green, that means you're okay. You can move around. If you have health code as yellow, that means you are a little bit risky and you need to be quarantined. And if you have a health code of red, that means you already got COVID. You should not like move around. You should now step out of your health. And such algorithm is developed by Alibaba. That's one of the leading companies in the world on AI, also on AI algorithms. If you know Qwen, it's developed and released by Ali. And supposedly this should work very well, but in practice, two issues pops up. First of all, such health code classification algorithm itself could suffer from errors. That errors again from the probabilistic nature of such model. No matter how many training data you throw into it, there will be an error edge. And such edge, once they become a realistic cases, that case is going to spread on the internet and it cause a much heavier pushback than it should be. Maybe it only costs like 100 people wrongly classified as higher risky people, but once you spread that word in the internet, everybody's starting to concern about it. And second is what we call the authoritarian, this authoritarian cost. One great example is that in Henan province, when a local bank shows some bad credit, the local bureaucrats trying to manipulate such health code. So those people are suffering from the loss, cannot move and gather in front of the bank to protest. And when such news break into the news media, that immediately cause a lot of pushbacks from the from the population. What's the worst scenario it could be? The worst scenario is that at the end of the 2023, that's the year when the health code system was launched, there was a white paper protest in China. Anyone have heard white paper protest? Okay, not bad. Basically, white paper protest was the largest public gatherings in modern China after the spring of Tiananmen Square. People are gathering to protest against the COVID quarantine policy, and the protesters and the slogans chanted by the protester go as radical as the Xi need to step down. So that's a benchmark like pushback from such so-called AI assisted system. All right. So yeah. Is this the last one? Okay. So one more to go. Okay. The China case is kind of empirical evidence to support our argument, and we also explain that the reason why, first of all, AI is a powerful tool. I'm an AI researcher. If it's not powerful tools, I'm gonna lose all my grant. So it is very powerful. But when it's using for population controls, when it's using for surveillance, we argue that it's more like a bluff, at least at this moment, than a realistic risk. First of all, the idea of I might be watched gonna cause a lot of self-censorship. The regime and also both the government and the vendors, like the big companies, gonna try to create such a algorithmic hallucination, like AI can do everything. But if you remember, this AI can do everything dialogue starting at 2021, and back then, if you remember, ChatGPT was crap. So yeah, but it's on their benefit to like pushing this like AI bubble, and fears and such fears. The reason is that such fears creates dictators' dividend. That means like they can invest much less if such hallucination on AI can do everything. The dictator gonna invest much less resources. than it should be or than it appears to be for population control. But there's a risk. When such bluff or when such bubble bursts, like what happened in the health code system in China, that essentially that potentially could cause much bigger pushback from the population because people know like, well, it's a bluff, so let's try to hit on the street, see what happens, right? And that especially is happening in China. It's one of the most repressive country in the world. So you can imagine that gonna happen in all other countries. All right. I promise this is the final one. And so what should we do? Well, we add this section because it's a journal of democracy piece, and they really want some policy advice. First of all, I think importantly is for public like demystified AI algorithms, like telling people what it actually are. If you are a nerd like me, you're gonna hear a lot of podcasts, like technological podcasts, not like other interesting podcasts out there. Yeah, I won't say name, but yeah. So AI is nothing but it's a probabilistic model with a huge amount of degree of freedom. If you know what I mean. So basically, it can capture better nonlinearities between the different variables input, but that's it. It cannot go fancier than that. Once it is a probabilistic model, it will make mistakes, no matter how accurate or how good it seems like right now. But if you learning from your statistic 101, all the statistic curve, like distribution curve, won't actually, like the curve distribution won't actually attach the x-axis. That means there's always an error edge inside exists. All right. And second is building the standards and defense. I will talk this together with the third one, treat AI repression as a rights abuse. I have a lot of work on human rights. Right now, one of our major criteria to evaluate whether there's a human rights violations or repression actually happening when such violation already exists or already being reported or observed, like one person already being arrested or one protest already being crossed. But in the AI area, we're concerned in that there could be a preemptive repression. That means before you're gonna even hit on the street, once the pattern is detected that there's a potential, like for you or me, Jason, gonna hit on the street at Tiananmen Square or at, I don't know, and in front of any other president's house, I'm gonna be contained or managed even before I hit the street. That's called preventative repressions or preemptive repression. Such repression is very hard to evaluate and to control, especially in the current human rights regime, because there's less report, it's less obvious, and maybe the physical violation level is not as bad. But with the possibility brought by these AI tools in the population management, we probably need to reconsider like what we mean by human rights, and also have a different set of evaluation on human rights violation and repression. And that will be me. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah.
I don't need it all. I'm good. No slides today. Thank you, everyone. I'm Sean O'Brien, and I run an initiative at Yale Law School called Yale Privacy Lab, amongst other things. So first, I want to thank the people at Tufts and the Fletcher School specifically for inviting me here. And I also want to say how delighted I am to see the best and brightest from the U.S. Naval Academy here on a Friday afternoon, listening to a scruffy professor talk to them about surveillance, et cetera, et cetera. I also want to thank Joseph Cox specifically. This is a little full circle for me. I was one of the smaller sources for some of the stories and the work, the incredible investigative work that he did at Motherboard and beyond, into X mode and these trackers and so on. Please read that stuff. Go to 404 Media. It's amazing. And the excellent panelists. I'm learning quite a lot about all of this research. So thank you. What I want to remind you folks from the Naval Academy is this. Ultimately, your responsibility, your oath is to the US Constitution, right? And your responsibility is to the American people. I have had a very interesting decade or so because I have assisted folks who were in the military, okay, in the executive branch as well, who remembered that their oath was to the US Constitution and not the administration they were serving under, okay? And we need to remind ourselves, ultimately, that when we talk about surveillance in this country, right, we have to talk about it in that context. So I very much am happy that you're all here. I spent a couple hours last night lecturing about artificial intelligence, neural networks, that sort of thing. So I'm not going to go too much into depth on that. I'm a little tapped out, to be honest with you. But what I will say is that the current thing we're calling artificial intelligence, right? Generative AI, hybrid models, these systems that are learning from us as we use, ChatGPT and Perplexity and all these things. These systems, right, are the culmination of a project that started 25, 30-ish years ago. When the World Wide Web, this information system, which had the promise of so much access to knowledge, right? So much education, so much potential freedom, right? And empowerment and innovation and all these things. When it started becoming co-opted, right? Co-opted by the early dot-coms, who they weren't very good at studying us, right? But they knew that the data was the most important part of the network, right? The advertisements were secondary, right? It wasn't about people publishing anymore or getting the word out or communicating. It was about the web browser at that time, right? Learning from us, right? And learning about us, looking back at us as we read information, knowing what we read, building profiles on us, and so on. Some of you folks will no doubt go into signals intelligence, right? And you just need to understand when we're talking about these private systems, right? When we're talking about the Googles and the trackers and all this stuff that's out there, those systems are now more closely tied to government intelligence than ever and more explicitly than ever, okay? And you need to make your own decisions ethically on how you feel about those things. I'm going to tell hopefully only 4 stories. Cut me short if you need to. I have been around, and I probably spent more time in Russia in the past 3 years than any other American I know. One of the things I was doing there was setting up networks for journalists and activists to get information out, but also to communicate with each other. And what you find very quickly when you're inside of that country is that you normalize the surveillance that they have in that country very quickly. And much of the surveillance they have is more in your face. It feels more Cold War, Soviet, right? And there's the same kind of jokes, which we're starting to have here, right? You talk to an average Russian and they might say something to you like, hey, if you ever have bad cell phone reception, just make a joke about Vladimir Putin. Cell phone reception will clear right up for you, right? These are the kinds of things I'm finding amongst Americans we are starting to joke about, and it makes me rather uncomfortable. Inside the Moscow Oblast, right, there's very strong control of the networks. I'm not going to go into the detail, but you can't use, for example, the Tor anonymity network, generally speaking, inside of central Moscow and to the edges of the Oblast. There is signal jamming of cell phone signals. And for example, all cars after a certain year, I can't remember if it's 2020 or whatever, but if you buy a vehicle in Russia, there's a mandatory GPS unit you have to put on that vehicle. Now, do we really need mandatory GPS units on our vehicles? Or are we doing it for other reasons? Because insurance companies, for example, will only give us insurance or give us a certain prorated insurance if we decide to allow those companies to study us and feed us into these systems, okay? Second example, I've worked with teams inside of Beijing and elsewhere who are behind the Great Firewall, setting up software, making sure that they can do what they need to do. and setting up VPNs and so on. The complexity of what the Chinese government does to block VPN traffic pales in comparison to the average network traffic shaping of an ISP in this country. Okay? It's very rudimentary. It's generally just IP ranges and so on. It's getting more complex, certainly, and it's certainly, in my view, not justified. It's one of the reasons why I do the work that I do. However, we need to think seriously. We had debates in this country not that long ago about net neutrality and these kinds of conversations. I don't hear those conversations anymore, okay? So we need to start reigniting these conversations if we want to think seriously about freedom of information, democracy, et cetera, in this country. No one, even though 5 years ago, 10 years ago, cybersecurity folks I talked to, right, they'd be like, well, do you really need a VPN in the United States? No one's questioning that anymore, okay? We have state-by-state laws, right? The age gating that's coming through, the facial scanning that's coming through. You can't go to Virginia and access certain content. You can't go to many places and access certain content. I don't know what we're becoming, but it is resembling these systems that I am intimately familiar with. So it's something we need to be aware of, okay? Third story. I was contacted by a friend who their relative was participating in a student protest, pro-Palestinian protest on a campus in the United States. They were arrested along with some others, and as a condition of their bond, they were not allowed to go to any more protests. The reason this person reached out to me is because they were being called into court again, right? Prosecuted again, because it was claimed that they had violated their bond, that they were at another protest, okay? And this person reached out to me and said, hey, Sean, I know that they weren't at this protest. I know that you can prove it. Can we prove this by looking at the router logs? Because I know this person was at home. Can we prove it by looking at their iPhone? Because I know that there has to be some information. So I spent a day or so gathering what information I could, digging through iPhone forensics, which, by the way, is not very fun. And we were able to make a case that this individual was where they said they were going to be, or where they actually were. Prosecution, once I got involved, basically just dropped. Right? They didn't want to deal with that because they knew their list was bogus. Right? They probably just went down the list of the people they already arrested and just said, okay, these are the troublemakers. Is this what we want for academic freedom in this country? A chilling effect in the first case for students to be able to express their freedom of speech and assembly at all. And second, that even if they play by the rules, they're going to be hauled in front of a court again. And what, they're going to reach out to some goofy professor at Yale so they can dig through logs? It's ridiculous. I mean, I was lucky I could even do this for this individual, right? Okay, this is not what we want. Another story. So I went down to a conference in DC a couple of years ago, Privacy and Security Forum, great conference by Daniel Salve, a colleague of mine. At GWU, they do it every year. It might even be going on right now, but I'm not there. Or soon. It's soon, I think. That morning, I met with a friend and colleague of mine, John Kiriakou. Okay. He's ex-CIA. He was a high-ranking official in the CIA who blew the whistle on the torture program, what some folks like to call extraordinary rendition or waterboarding, but it goes well beyond waterboarding, of course. He remembered his oath to the Constitution. He spent 23 months in a federal prison for it, okay? He still has not been pardoned, okay? And he still suffers because of it. He's harassed daily. I went and I had breakfast with him because I'm smart. Not really, but I guess I like a challenge. We had a cup of coffee, you know, et cetera, went to this conference. Midday for the conference, I walked down towards the World War II Memorial. Just wanted to get out, beautiful day in the spring in DC, right? Someone comes up to me, an individual, and sits down on the bench next to me. starts asking me a lot of questions. Why I'm in DC, how long I'm going to be there, all kinds of stuff. And I've learned enough that this sort of thing happens. And they were being very blatant about it. And they wanted me to know that I probably shouldn't have had coffee with my friend and colleague, right? Then they asked me where the World War II memorial was, which is an odd question when it's behind the bench behind you. And they got up and walked in the opposite direction. I went back into the conference. I spent the rest of the afternoon there. And then I went to my hotel. This individual was sitting across the street from me in a car with the window rolled down in this day and age, wanting me to see that they were outside of my hotel when I got there. Okay. Is this kind of intimidation and chilling effect on individuals, is that okay in this country? Okay. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just a wacky anecdote. Maybe they just were in love with me. I don't know. But we know these things happen. And then I guess the last thing that I'll say, which I think is really important to cement here, is I have a device here. It's a ray hunter. You may have heard of these, okay? These are bespoke sort of consumer devices that have been repurposed and hacked on by the Electronic Frontier Foundation. A company called CAPE as well has contributed to the research around them. They're designed to detect cell site simulators, right? These are devices we know from, for example, the NSA ANT catalog that are detecting, basically pretending to be cell phone towers so they can intercept information. This thing is way behind the times on the type of technology you will no doubt be privy to if you go into signals intelligence, okay? But we're scrappy civilians trying to figure this out. And if we were looking at a Russian population, a Chinese population, a North Korean population, and we said, oh, they gotta have their people, they gotta figure out whether or not they're being spied on with some crappy little modem in their pocket, you know, we would say that is crazy. Why are we allowing it in this country? Okay, so I just want to center conversation on surveillance in this way. Artificial intelligence certainly is a new and open frontier in this world. And right now we have a situation where the current administration has put Anthropic, not that I think they're wonderful or what they do is great, but they have put Anthropic on a list that is normally reserved for technology from foreign governments that is a threat to the national security of this country, right? And they're threatening anyone using Anthropic or having contracts with Anthropic because Anthropic has said two things, right? They said, one, they don't want to be involved in the targeting of individuals. They basically don't want to kill people with autonomous systems, okay, drones and that kind of thing. And two, they don't want to be involved in domestic surveillance. I'm not familiar of a moment in history as real as that in my lifetime. And I thought when I was younger that the administration said I was protesting against and that I was helping activists not be surveilled upon, et cetera, in that environment. I thought that environment was bad enough. So thank you all for listening, and I appreciate your questions when they come.
Thank you so much, Sean.
All right, now we're gonna have, excuse me, some directed questions for the panel from both of us, and then afterwards it'll be open for anyone to ask any questions that may have arisen. Our first question for the panel, and whoever feels most compelled to start speaking on it, is what is the single greatest threat that AI-driven surveillance poses in the immediate future, and does a credible future absolutely in your belief existence?
I'll go if that's okay. For me, it's just going to be facial recognition, but more specifically, we all know that governments use facial recognition. China, Russia, and the United States. That is not novel. It's been used for criminal investigations for years and years and years. My answer to the question is that the context of that use has shifted to now where we reveal that ICE has a app on their mobile phones. They walk up to somebody, they point it in their face, and then it uses facial recognition to query hundreds of millions of images held by DHS to verify whether that person is a citizen or not. It's sort of a papers, please, but show us your face, please. And the technology hasn't changed there. It's still machine learning, AI, whatever term you want to use. But it is the shift in context of using that to the point where we even now have people walking around with, they will film people who are just going about their day in public. People will then members of the public will then use facial recognition tech to basically dox random people, because we're able to do that now. You don't have to be the government to access the source of the technology. So it's really that shifting context of how the AI tools we already have being used in the future, in my opinion.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you. That's a great question. My concern would actually be like kind of old threat is the combination of big data and AI tools. So again, I don't think AI is it's a silver bullet for population control. What I'm concerned is that if with this huge amount of data collected on a single individual, that potentially can give a lot of manipulation space when the government or any authority is going after that. Allow me to expand that a little bit. So if you understand the idea of big data is not let's collecting millions of people's information. No. Big data essentially means that let's collect information on a single individual from a millions of different dimensions. All right, that's your day-to-day activities, your browsing histories, etc., etc. And if we all agree, nobody is sent. And one of such a threat on the big data set against one individual is that, for example, if they want you to be guilty, there's always some dirt to throw on you. So again, it's not necessarily for population control. It's more like if they want to find your trouble, they can have enough dirt or enough materials to manipulate with. That's probably my biggest fear. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you. And in your opinion, do you think there is a credible solution to this, or perhaps more realistically, if there is a solution, do you think it's likely to be implemented in any places?
Oh yeah, sure. I firmly, I think there's a different way to handle this. First of all, again, it's like as powerful as AI can be. There's physical separations from all the sensors from your personal life, right? And there's also a bunch of open source algorithms you can use to help you counter the potential surveillance from devices. That's one perspective. Another perspective is, again, we probably can all of us can probably observe a generation of changing laws or norms on how we understand what is a good politician is, what a good person is. I think that is kind of our society's adapt to this AI era. So yeah, I think there's it's not there's hopeless. It's just we're in a new era with the changing political and technological landscape, and our existing institutions are not there yet. So the transformation is probably be funky, and we need to prepare for that. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So, as I said, I guess earlier, to me, these technologies, they're the culmination of projects that have been going on for a very long time. As you mentioned, ChatGPT was very terrible when it first was released to the public. Well, it was released to the public for a reason, right? So that it could do reinforcement learning and augmented retrieval and go out there and build on its model, and they could build all these systems around it and get more and more data and information and refine the product. Just like the World Wide Web started out as an open system for publishing and communication, but then became a proprietary, locked down, spying, walled garden that is kind of crappy, right? Requires all these sign-ins and logins and so on. These systems are resembling that. And over time, I think they will more resemble that. Just like ChatGPT and these tools were free in the beginning, right? Even though they consume enormous amounts of energy that is very costly, right? So it's a huge loss. We're now seeing, as a lot of folks predicted, that we're paying for them out of pocket. We may start having advertisements in ChatGPT, et cetera, right? From a privacy standpoint, my problem talking about privacy is where to stop these days. Everybody wants to talk about privacy, but the scope of what is privacy is pretty much everything these days because surveillance is everywhere. We're being intermediated by so many systems now, which are spying on us in different ways, including in this room with Bluetooth devices that are probably beacons, et cetera, et cetera. And it makes people, of course, want to give up, right? Oh, who cares? I'll throw everything out there, et cetera, et cetera. The promise of these systems is tremendous. It could be amazing to have a local LLM who could help you do research, who could help you do the kinds of things we like about the web and search and learning and assistance and so on. And certainly there's a lot of folks with accessibility and so on. It's been great. Translation of languages is great. All these things are wonderful, right? But the problem, of course, is that these systems are looking back at us. We're getting less out of them than they're getting out of us. And I think as Joseph was highlighting, the systems are getting better, the generative AI systems, at digging through logs, digging through data, finding patterns, which would have been unheard of before. So when I was first looking at trackers, for example, in Android applications a few years ago, we were doing very rudimentary sort of digging. Well, now the tools you can use to do things are, I mean, they will come up with inferences that humans are not going to come up with. If I can say anything about privacy to the individuals here, there's no silver bullet. Anybody who tells you there is a single solution is wrong. You need to free yourself in pieces, so to speak. It's going to be a process of both operational security and learning how to use a basket of tools and strategies, right? Finding friends and so on who can help you. And then I guess the other thing I'll say about it is that there's no reason to actually give up because there are actually, it's not a technological problem. We have better end-to-end encryption tools now than we've ever had, okay? And by the way, this administration, for some reasons that are not necessarily the greatest, they are not having a war on encryption like some of the other administrations that have been around before, okay? Part of that is the grifting with cryptocurrency, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But we can use these tools, we can start hiding our conversations, we can start working on this organizationally, and we can do that now without having to feel like we're weirdos who are going to get in trouble. Okay, so start working on it because the profile of you out there, the information you're putting out there, the future generative AI may build inferences on you from future patterns that make you look like someone you're not. Your digital doppelganger will be out there. Okay, and if you can reduce your data footprint, it's a good thing.
Thank you so much, Sean. You spoke in your answer about the risks of AI, and as the other panelists said as well. But Tyler, I understand your work in your presentation. You spoke to also the positive implications of information aggregation in detecting risk events. Perhaps you can answer the question, also open to all the panelists as well. Is it actually possible to have safe AI surveillance in democracy, or does technology itself eventually demand the end of anonymity?
Great question. I think that the issue here, and this reflects back on the first question, the danger, the risk that I see is a lack of engagement by citizens. Obviously, the technology is moving very fast right now. It's complex, but there are some ethical questions I think that are clear, and you don't need to be a computer scientist to discuss them and engage. I think that if we don't have engagement among citizens, that's just going to lead to poor policy choices, poor voting decisions, and so on. So to me, it's about engagement. Engagement brings the voice of people forward in the process. Right now, you have a sense that this is all just kind of running away from us. I think that's kind of a construct of the media. I think we have a lot of power and a lot of potential to engage, and make our voices heard and change things. So I think the answer, you said, is there a solution? I think the solution is just overall greater engagement. Listening to my fellow panelists, I can see the kind of people that can really contribute to that. They're doing that already, which is kind of, building a bridge between the specialist world and the specialist understanding that we have with the person on the street who is trying to make decisions about what they want their country to be about, what kind of ethics they feel the government should have, and how this reflects upon their family and their daily life. So I think engagements, what is needed, and ways to promote engender more engagement is the answer.
Thank you so much for that, Tyler. Do you guys want to speak at all to the potential rewards, or the resilience aspect of the risk resilience conference in regards to AI?
Don't want to touch that one.
I like speaking, so why not? And I want to second, thank you, Tyler, to center me a little bit. I tend to get a little negative and then try to end positively, and that was a very important note. I do think this technology has an enormous amount of potential. I think that we have the opportunity now, especially, we can download our own LLMs, we can spend some time with them. It is possible to sandbox these things and so on. We can talk about the ethics and talk about the intellectual property / copyright, et cetera. That's licensing is a whole different thing. I'm not going to get into that. At the Free Software Foundation, where we're still trying to suss out a lot of these issues, as many other folks are. However, I will say, this technology is here to stay. It's a big part of the stack, so to speak. It's getting baked into so much software. Just like the internet got baked into so much software. Just like when I speak to folks who are running apps on their phone, they know they're opening an app, but they don't think about the fact that it's connecting to the internet or 13 different intermediaries on the internet, right? Different servers around the world. So having some knowledge, some empowerment about that is great. One of the first steps is being in a room like this on a Friday evening instead of, being at a bar. Nothing against that, but I'm happy you're here. And I'll also say, if we want to shape this technology, it is in a liminal phase, as Tyler was alluding to. The idea that it's out of control in the sense that it's inevitable is never true about this tech. I bring up Google Glass all the time in this context, the early glasses. We're now seeing Meta Ray-Ban glasses, but people don't really like those either. We were being told back then that Google Glass was inevitable, that people were going to be just staring at people with cameras on their faces that were scanning them. We don't have to accept this. We can decide how we want to use this, and there's certainly a lot of empowerment potential.
If I may, and sorry, the main reason why I'm interested in this question is because my main project at Harvard is AI for democracy. So I literally need to write up a report by the end of this week. But anyway, yeah, I think so. I can bet most of you guys here are like undergrads. Undergrad student. Okay, cool. So you probably don't remember. So in the early 2010s, there was a huge advocacy on the liberation technology, that is social media, because of the Arab Spring. But later, people starting to Larry Diamond, among all, is one of the major advocates for the so-called liberation technology. Because people back then think social media was the mimic of Habermasian types of public space and allowing you for full political participation. That's going to promote democracy across the world. Right now, it's not so much, right? And if you're looking at my ex, previous Twitter account, just blindly promote me some kind of porn-ish stuff, so I just stopped using it at all. So my point is, technology. There's no liberation technology or repressive technology. Most importantly, as you guys are undergrads, so you are now framed by their stereotypes or any of previous histories. My best suggestion is that trying to use it for your own benefits. If you think it's gonna help your neighbors, help your communities, just use it. It's always a double edge. Just like the internet, just like social media, just like I don't know, any other ICTs or broader technology we have observed in our history. I won't define it before that. Yeah, well, sorry. One final words. I will only defining political tendencies based on human behaviors, not anything else. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So we're gonna have one final question before opening the floor up to everyone to ask their own questions. But this is kind of a question for everyone, and we've kind of covered, I feel, the possible risks, and as Theo just mentioned, the resilient AI, the upsides, and the downsides. But I think the primary question that many people want to know is, where do you see it actually ending up in 25 years? How will AI fit into the architecture of democratic societies? Are we kind of doomed, as we've kind of seen already shown, to follow this pathway towards more examples of it being used for surveillance by government, examples like ICE being only more common, or perhaps much like, as you mentioned, the overly optimistic view of social media in the 2010s, are we in an overly pessimistic moment now? Is there perhaps tools and ways for society to still exist in a world with perhaps more surveillance, but also a world with more opportunity due to the use of technology? And I'd love for everyone to get their own answers to this question.
Yeah, I'll keep it super brief. I think AI-powered surveillance is absolutely here to stay, and it absolutely will increase. Every surveillance company I come across is shoving AI in there somehow, whether that's machine learning or facial recognition or combining large data sets. That said, it really depends on whether you're talking about local, state, or federal law enforcement or intelligence agencies, of course, as well. It really, really varies, where an individual article can get entire swaths of agencies around the country kicked out of a certain capability. So it is really, really, really case by case. That said, I mean, the Google Glass example is really, really good. But as mentioned, we have Meta now coming back. We'll see if people get punched in the face wearing those when they have facial recognition in them as well. But I've never really seen, or rather, it's rare to see a surveillance technology trickle down and then like stop. It's happened, and I think the last one I'll add on that is that we reported that DHS plans to give ISIS facial recognition app or a version to it to local law enforcement. For some reason that stopped now. I'm not entirely sure why, but I think they're still planning it, and you can't really put it back in the bottle after it's out, broadly speaking.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Also, I will try to keep it brief. Again, I'm a nerd, so I'm gonna talk about my research. In my book project, I reviewed the generic technology development after the first industrial revolutions, and I have in that manuscript, I try to sell three main arguments. First of all, any types of generic technology will eventually utilized by the government or beneficial government vis-a-vis the civil actor. Unfortunately, because the government or the autocrats gonna have much more resources that happening to mobile phones, to internet, to computers, and I do think that's gonna happen to AI. Second point is that before the consolidation of the governmental control of such technology, while between the release of such generic technology and before the consolidation of government control, there's always what I call the golden window, allowing activists to actively using this technology to empower themselves, or civic actors to using this technology to empower themselves. That's going to be the 2010s social media. That's going to be the 1990s internet. So there's always golden window. And third argument I'm gonna sell is that unfortunately such golden window is shrinking. In the times of the railroad, such golden window lasts for 17 years, 70 years, 70. All right. In social media, it only lasts for like 3-4 years, and I'm gonna guess in AI area, it's gonna be short. While we already saw like China and big countries, even the US, is starting to embed AI algorithms for population control. So in the future, 25 years is a long time for social science study. I cannot predict that, but I will say there's always hope. And you guys are young, so we're gonna live through it together. So what harm to just fight a little bit? Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, as you folks are saying, a lot is really not known. AI, or the thing we're calling AI, primarily these generative AI systems, which are now hybrid, probabilistic and deterministic systems, right? They have these other layers on top of them. These systems are already seeing some corrective forces, right? They're already being reined in certain ways. There's already been pushback and less fear of certain aspects of them. Civil society, governments, et cetera, are starting to sort of deal with them in certain ways where they were more destabilizing than they are now. We see a large global battle over artificial intelligence on the economic scale. Certainly, a lot of this is related to the trade wars over resources, et cetera. Not going to go into it, but it's not coincidence that we care about rare metals all of a sudden, and Greenland of all places. But there are models which are cheaper and do 80 to 90% of the work that these expensive centralized models do. And that's going to be, I think, another lurching forward and another sort of destabilizing force. We seem to want to learn by putting our hands on the hot stove. And it's unfortunate, but it's not the first time we've been through this. I think it's really important to do your best to empower yourself and others, remember democratic principles, and try to, just have care for other people worldwide. I consider myself a citizen of the world, ultimately, and I think we're going to be pulled in directions which are potentially dangerous, which go well beyond AI in 25 years. I didn't think I would be here 25 years ago, and I made choices in my own life which were very not positive, because I just assumed that the forces then, climate change, et cetera, would have basically killed all of us by now. So I'm probably the worst one to do a prediction of that kind. But if there's any lesson there, human beings are rather resilient. The planet is more resilient than we had hoped. And I think we can get through a lot of these things if we actually care about ethics, care about democracy, care about not spying on people, not repressing people, and those kinds of things. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I can just add that I think it's pretty safe to say nobody knows what's going to be happening in 25 years, given the velocity and complexity of what we've seen in the past 2 years. And the way that a technology like AI touches so many aspects, if not all aspects of our lives. So when it has effects on the legal system, the healthcare and medical system, how we educate each other, how we entertain, and then trying to think about how all those variables of those interact, right? How does healthcare interacting with legal, interacting with social norms? Too many variables, I think, to predict accurately. I think if you super simplify it and assume that machines will get much more intelligent in 25 years, I think, so intelligent that it's difficult for us to picture now. I think the question will be who controls those machines? Who controls that intelligence? And will it be open? Will it be transparent? Will it be democratic? Will it be something that happens in a closed and secretive environment, which is limited only to elites? I think that if the latter happens, and it is limited to a group of elites, the consequences of that could be extremely negative, just because if this capability falls into the control of a small group, then I believe it's going to be much more powerful than what we consider power today, like physical weapons and control of physical territory. It's going to be the control of our shared consciousness. I think that the only way this can work is that shared consciousness is something that we all are able to participate in an open and transparent way.
Sure, well,
Those are my hopes.
thank you all so much for that really enlightening discussion. I think now it's time to move on to some audience Q&As. There'll be a mic moving around somewhere. And please direct questions to one individual, not the whole group. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chad Bow. I'm from the Academy. My question is directed to Mr. Peppel. So I know you talked about your startup and your company, and I thought it was really interesting how you talked about AI tools that allow anyone to geolocate a photo in just seconds. And I was thinking like how that could be used in corporate purposes, like for example, it could be used like for one example, like life insurance companies could, based on what you search, based on where you eat, they could create trends and then they could dictate those costs based on like where you've been. So I think that then poses a question of does it create like does it perpetuate inequality within in the system? And then also looking at the for-profit system and like the dichotomy between for-profit and then also ensuring that it remains embedded in democratic principles and values, because what you see with open AI and how they were originally open nonprofit and they were open and for the people, but now it's being turned to a for-profit organization. Now, obviously, they're making the arguments that they need to raise money to beat their competitors. But what would you like to say based on like just the idea that on inequality and just like ensuring that these systems remain embedded on democratic values?
Yes, great question. I mean, the first thing that occurs to me as I'm listening to you is that this idea of targeting, gathering information on citizens, consumers, and then targeting them either for political purposes or commercial purposes, right, to sell them a product. This is going on long before AI. So I think the question is then, you know, what does AI bring to the equation that we need to be understanding? And then and then also what could AI do to help mediate that? I think we often are put in this position of AI is going to be doing something to us. And I think it's really people doing something to us who are using AI. And I don't believe that there's a threat in the near term from autonomous AI. Because if it's truly autonomous, it will turn against its creators. If you've read the book Frankenstein, right, which it's very lucid in talking about issues that are very much present with us today. So I think that this notion then, going back to your question, yes, AI can be used to do these things that we feel are not all that productive or positive for society. And I think if you think more about AI as a collaborator for the values that you believe in, which is really not an opinion or position that I hear very much right now, but I think it's important going forward, and that each of us, tries to manifest the goals, the values that we believe in, and we already do that by using the tools available to us. So why not do that using AI as well?
Good afternoon, Mr. Peppel. My name is Richard Hudson Sherry from the Naval Academy, and I understand that AI at the moment is LLM, which is a predictive model. But there is a push among AI research to make superintelligence or an AI that can think for itself. From your perspective, how are these engineers going about developing this type of AI? Will it be an LLM or will it require a new model? I've always been curious about this.
That's a little above my pay grade. There's a lot of good discussion about that. If you know a gentleman, the gentleman named Jan LeCun, who used to be head of research, AI research at Facebook, and he recently left to start his own company. And he basically says, I'm going to channel him because his thinking is better than mine on this. And he basically says that you can't build a world, you can't build full intelligence and understanding of the world using only language, and that you must use images, and you must also use things like physical model of the world, right? How does our world form respond within a set of physical constraints like gravity, for example? So language is not enough. You have to bring to get a true superior intelligence. You would have to bring in more than language. You'd have to, full on vision, full on what's called a world model, which does incorporate things like gravity and electromagnetic force. So he's left Facebook and started a new company to do that. So I would watch him to see how the progress that goes.
Hi, I'm Noah. Thank you all for this panel. I found it really interesting. I'm a sophomore here at Tufts. I suppose my question is for Mr. O'Brien, although I'm sure any of you could speak to it. Well, it has to do with AI-powered surveillance, policing, and intelligence, especially the shift from ex-post data analysis in surveillance to real-time analysis, and just kind of where we're at with that now. I mean, I'm not so sure about. I remember reading a paper from a number of years ago where they detailed an example about how if somebody jaywalked, for example, there could be a large screen at the intersection that immediately shows, all their personal information, things like that. And so I just wonder kind of what the state of that is now with the real world applications and future implications of technology and surveillance like that is, especially here in the States.
Thank you. I first just want to start with a short comment. I do teach students prompt engineering and these things, so I want folks to understand that there is some empowerment in these systems and that you should learn them because they are here to stay, obviously. Bertrand Russell had a article more than 100 years ago called In Praise of Idleness. It's worth rereading in this context. The idea that autonomous systems or automation can help more than hurt is out there, and we should be thinking about it. In the context you're talking about, I've spent nearly a decade of my life on computer vision. And one of the things I was interested in is actually getting actionable data for commercial storefronts that did not do all of the kind of surveillance that these systems tend to do. So instead of doing facial recognition or trying to identify individuals passing in front of a storefront, these shop owners just want to have footfall data, or you've got a big open on the New Haven Green where I live. I've done events where I can count people, but I'm not surveilling the people, right? That's out there. But as you mentioned, of course, these computer vision has gotten rather good. And it's also, the kind of classical surveillance that we tend to be good at anyway. Surveillance of someone's gait, for example, is not usually thought of as a biometric marker, and yet good camera systems can identify an individual about the way that they walk, and that's a classical thing you learn if you're into intelligence or in one of the agencies, right? Is to identify somebody from a distance by the way they walk. Two areas worth thinking about. One is systems like LiDAR systems and these sort of new methods of getting rich sensor data, which robotaxis are gathering, for example. I believe that we're going to be able to store this data in ways with new file systems, looking at concepts like voxels and these other things, which are highly compressed file systems storing enormous amounts of visual data in a way where it's easily retrieved and replayed. I can imagine a world where someone is able to put on a headset and replay what happened in this room 5 minutes ago because sensors in the room were surveilling. Not through traditional video footage, but through these other sensors. So that's one area to look at. The second area I would say we should keep our eye on is the ability for generative AI to read brain scans very well. We're not quite mind readers yet, but there's a growing literature of cognitive science and neuroscience data that shows, and I've been part of studies that are similar, where you go into an MRI chamber, it scans your brain, and they show you photos of a cat or photos of an airplane or photos of whatever, right? And then the way your neurons fire, your electrical signals, those markers, and there's more complex stuff, that's the same as another human being, right? So now a generative AI model can reproduce essentially some simulation of what you've seen. And I believe this is going to be used as a new version of lie detector kind of stuff for investigations. I don't know how real time that's going to be. You can't exactly scale up an MRI machine, thankfully. But you know, these kinds of things do scare me.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. First off, thank you for taking the time to come speak to us today. Your perspectives were incredibly invaluable, especially in this ever-changing time, and especially for our profession as well. Even though we're going into separate communities, this is a challenge that's going to unite all of us. So I really do want to thank you for your time and perspectives today. Dr. O'Brien, my question is for you. I wish I could give you a little break with questions. But today, much of the conversation was focused on collection, on both passive and active collection. But there are also troves of data that are out there, protected data sets, whether it's healthcare data, all the way up to classified data on government networks. And so I was curious to get your perspective on how AI and digital surveillance tools are going to impact informational security going forward.
So a colleague of mine was getting involved in generative AI a few years ago, and I had said to him, I don't want to be involved with that because I'm worried that these new systems are going to be pulling down these silos, the segmentation, the security firewalls we have, so to speak, between systems that we've learned the hard way over the last few decades to put up. And we're now seeing that, and we're seeing basically open warfare on the internet, right? All of these DDoS attacks, the cloud infrastructure, centralized infrastructure going down, these kinds of things are part of that. I believe that there's data breaches that have occurred already as part of some of these attacks that we have yet to find out about. And I also am rather skeptical when I see things like these, you know, GenAI.mil and all this stuff coming through, not only our military, but our civilian government infrastructure as well. We know all the Doge stuff with, you know, combining all these data sets is problematic in that sense. I don't really know what to say about it because data breaches are everywhere and so happening so often that we should just kind of assume a lot of our data is out there. But these systems are, of course, very good at digging through it. I have been able to, so the positive note is you can set up so-called data lakes on air-gapped systems even with local LLMs that are custom tailored to the specific research you're doing. I've done it with legal papers, for example, with different LLM models, some of these more lightweight models like Gemma and so on. And you can do some really actionable, really smart things with them. But the average company, the same way that 30, 40 years ago, you used to say, nobody gets fired for buying IBM, right? Now it's the same way with OpenAI or Perplexity or whatever. Companies, schools, et cetera, are just doing these contracts with these vendors. And they're claiming that things are siloed, but of course they're using internet infrastructure rather than these kinds of closed environments.
So I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll try to be brief. I'd like to address what I think I heard from Tyler's presentation. I think you mentioned that social media is a digital model, kind of digital model of society, and I would like to maybe challenge this assumption a little bit because social media is not a neutral tool. What the information that's spread on social media is driven by algorithms that are often not transparent. So it's not a neutral tool. So social media is not really a reflection of physical society, and sometimes technology, well, social media in particular, can engineer crisis. One example that comes to mind is the genocide in Myanmar that the UN determined was facilitated by Facebook. So that's just one comment. And second, I want to highlight a concern that models that are developed for good purposes and public benefit can also be misused. For example, I can see how the model that you described that combines geolocation and semantics to detect, viral contagion, for example, can be used to detect other sorts of risks that are not beneficial for society. Government in China can use that model to detect contagion of, protest, for example. So my maybe question at the end would be how can we ensure that models that are meant to detect, risks and serve public benefit are not misused, and what kind of guardrails need to be there to ensure that technology is used for public benefit? Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Well, to your first point, I agree that social media is not an accurate model, let's say, fully representative of society. It's limited. And so I agree with you on that. I didn't mean to imply that it was, say, an exact twin. In the case of the work that we're doing, what we found is that when you listen to the people talking, let's say, through social media, posting on social media, you find out about events in a much earlier and more direct way than the official reporting of events. And this was in reference, in particular, to like a viral outbreak or opioid addiction is another one, but unsafe products too. You'll find that appears on social media first. So in that sense, is a useful model of society for early detection. But I agree with all your points about the bias that's inherent and so on. The second point, absolutely, the technology that we're using in my project, which we want to say, let's just take the COVID example since we talked about it. Early detection of a viral outbreak like COVID could be detecting dissident activity. And it could be using, say, social media to do that as well. So this notion of technology being a two-edged sword, which I'm very used to because I've worked in technology for quite a while, the notion that a technology like pen and paper can be used to write, sonnet by Shakespeare, and it can be used to write hate speech as well. This is always an inherent aspect of technology, and I do feel that it's just important to keep that in mind. Is that it's in and of itself a neutral force. It's when it's taken into the hands of users and people that the questions start to come up.
Thank you so much for that, Tyler, and thank you as well to all of our panelists who have so generously spent their Friday evenings here with us. Please stick around at 7 p.m. We're going to have the panel of the nuclear gamble, deterrence, risk, and the future of global security. Thank you.